We're going to get started. Welcome to Land Use. If you have your information form, and you can put it up here at the front. If you don't, there's a few more, but be sure to turn in an information form. As I mentioned, that's going to be helpful in terms of putting together teams that we're going to work on land use hearings throughout the semester, and we're going to do that as a teams. I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second. So, but anyway, the forms are useful and important, and they also get you sort of thinking about land use and what kind of experiences you might have had or not have had. You do not have to have any prior knowledge or experience with land use in any way for this class. You will get plenty of it through the class, but if you have some, it's always interesting and helpful to know what it is that what your experiences or background has been and what interests you. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Normally, and those of you who've had me before know, I have a pretty loud projection in the classroom. I've been getting over a respiratory illness, so I do not have as much power behind my voice today as I normally do, and I'm going to probably be drinking a fair amount of what at one time was iced coffee is now mostly water, or just plain water, through the semester, through the class session today. So. But if you don't hear something, speak up and ask me to repeat it. But for the most part, the lecture part of the class, you should be able, under normal conditions, to hear well. So, Professor Crawford was up class in the 550. So. All right, so we're so I'm going to start about sharing a little bit about the course, giving you some introduction to the course, and the starting point is this is an interdisciplinary course. It's land use planning and law, so we're going to be looking at both planning and law as it relates to primarily land use, although there are a variety of other kinds of issues that come up in terms of the environment, in terms of urban settings, urban communities and cities and so forth, and even non-urban, so cities and suburban areas or rural areas and exurban areas and so on and so forth. And so we're going to look at a variety of issues. Occasionally we may touch on transportation or some other kinds of things, but our central focus is going to be land use, and we're going to be looking at both planning and law concepts as they relate. We're going to cover a fair amount of law, a fair amount of legal concepts in the course. So for those of you who are come from planning degree programs or public administration degree programs, real estate graduate certificate program, or other programs outside the law school, you will get what I think will be to you a fair amount of law. However, to the law students, they're going to maybe see this as a little bit in the realm of law light, because land use is a field in which there are some really significant legal principles, but the actual amount of law is quite a bit less. Okay, so several people in the class took environmental law with me. There is an enormous amount of environmental law. In contrast, land use is a field that has, like I said, the law is important, but it is actually the amount of it is quite a bit less. And what we will deal with are sort of overarching principles that apply, and also process design. So a fair amount of what we see in the land use realm actually has to do with how you structure decision-making processes and governance, often at local levels, for deciding what land uses will be allowed or incentivized, and how your communities are going to look. So, so that's going to be how it plays out. Also, for the law students, you will find that we will review or highlight a number of important constitutional law principles that you need to remember before you take the bar exam. But this will not be like a con law class. We will actually just get down to the heart of what the rules and what the doctrine are, and then how they play out in land use, as opposed to big picture theory about the meaning of the Constitution. So, so if you love the meaning of the Constitution, that's awesome. That is not this class. So that's it's much more practical, much more applied. So that's some of the things that the course will do for you. It will be useful in terms of reviewing some of the key tests and so forth, and things like equal protection, or First Amendment, or due process, or separation of powers, those kinds of things. For the planning students, we will cover all, or nearly all, of the cases that are testable on the AICP exam. So you will be relatively well prepared. And so for the law students, the AICP exam is a exam for which planners can become certified as planners. It is not like the bar exam; it's not required. You don't have to do it in order to be a planner. So that's one thing you should be intensely envious of your planning colleagues, because they can be a planner without passing it. But many say desirable thing in your career, and so many of our planning graduates take the AICP exam, and so for those of you who are going to do that, this is a useful course, because they do indeed test law, and they will test much of what we cover. Okay? So again, practical from that standpoint. The course, as I mentioned, is interdisciplinary, and one of the things that you're going to learn to do is to work well in interdisciplinary teams. Every group of students that I have taught in this class has always said the same thing, which is that they just didn't totally understand or grasp until they took this class how vastly different people from different disciplines or professions look at the same issues. And so those whose background is in law will look at the issues very differently than those whose background is in planning. And then there's usually students who have other kinds of backgrounds in the class, and it will all contribute to a broader perspective on these land use issues. And so I think that will be very illuminating, very interesting. The reality, again, practical, professional reality, is every single one of you is going to have to work with people who are not in your profession, right? Okay, so you will have clients, you will have people that you deal with, you will work on teams, and if you are if you can only see things from your disciplinary perspective, you are going to be less effective, less successful. Right? And I'll just cut to the heart of the matter. One of the frequent criticisms of lawyers has been ever since I was in law school, which was eons ago, okay, is that lawyers like to take over their clients' problems from them. And clients do not like that, and so forth. And it is partly just how we train you in law school. It's partly the kind of folks who come to law school and so forth, but it ends up leading to some tension and conflict in your professional practice. You have to either learn how to not just take over and direct your client's problems from a purely legal perspective, or you find yourself with fewer clients, is sort of the bottom line. And so one of the great things that this class does is it helps you develop some of that skill set of communicating across disciplines, working together, sharing ideas, sharing work responsibilities. But planners, in my experience in this course, one of the great things that this course does is it helps you not be afraid of taking on and disagree with the lawyers. Because again, the initial sort of experience that many of the planning students have in this course is to be a little bit kind of overwhelmed, but to kind of step back from the relative assertiveness of the law students in the class. Okay, so again, it'll be a great experience. You will get a lot out of it and be vastly more skilled for it. Okay? So teamwork is going to be one of the skills that we develop and we work on. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about teamwork next week. So don't feel like we're going to gloss over that, but we can spend more time talking about it next week. The class will involve most of the class sessions having some sort of substantive lecture component. I am going to do a fair amount of covering the material through a lecture format, laying out kind of what it is, how it works, that sort of thing. We will have ideally some discussion, but the participatory part of the class is primarily the working on the actual case studies, the actual problems. There are 3 major land use conflicts that you are going to be working on through the semester. Before we get there, we're going to do some little mini exercises in class, so there'll be some other things that are also participatory, but the bulk of the participatory process is to be working in your teams, and we will do 3 simulated hearings. So if each problem is going to have a simulated hearing, in each of the problems it is a land use issue that actually arose in the real world here in Louisville. The first one is the West End Walmart. So some of you may remember that, but there was a proposal for a Walmart in West Louisville on Broadway, and the Walmart had to apply for a variety of approvals from Louisville Metro government. There were hearings on it. There are a variety of legal and planning standards that apply to that, so it's a great opportunity to bring the 2 together. And one team will represent Walmart. One team will represent Louisville Metro government, including the several of you will be planning commission members and actually make a decision in our simulation. And there will be, the 3rd team will be representatives of various community groups that spoke up on the issue, or in some cases on the community groups in order to kind of have a range of perspectives. Sometimes we sort of created some fictionalized community groups that represent interests that actually do exist in Louisville and existed in these problems, but we kind of, instead of it being just somebody speaking as an individual, we sort of organize it around a group identity of some sort or another. Then the second one is a conservation design subdivision out in Middletown, right at the edge of Floyd's Fork. So he raises a variety of issues related to land use and the environment. It also raises some issues, gets us into sort of thinking about sort of more of the suburban type of land use controls and suburban land use issues and so forth. And so what will happen is you will continue to work with your same team, but you will all shift sides. So if you were representing the government in hearing number 1, in hearing number 2, you will represent either the developer or the community group. I forget how it shifts, but everybody sort of shifts one spot and so forth. And so your team will. So basically, in the end, you will work on a government team, you will work on a developer team, and you will work on a community team. So you'll have an experience with each of those throughout the semester. And then the 3rd hearing is a proposed biofuel plant in West Louisville along the Ohio River, out by the Shawnee neighborhood. This was a proposal that was got in the news a lot about 15 years ago. It was very controversial. Ultimately, because of the controversy, the applicant walked away. But again, we have a file. In that case, the decision-making body is the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And so you'll have real-world facts, real-world issues and problems and constraints and opportunities and so forth, and you will work together to play your team's role. Okay? So does anybody have any questions about that? So the most substantial part of your grade in the course, so we'll get to that, is going to be on the hearings themselves. The hearing simulations, there's a grading rubric that's on page 9, and there is 180 total possible points. This is actually on page 7. There's 180 possible points in the course. Okay, 120 of them are for the simulation. Okay, 40 apiece, and your grade is the team grade. So each team will be graded, and you will have the grade of your team. So just like the real world, right? You want your team to be successful. It creates the right sort of incentive structure to work together as a team. Individual achievement isn't going to work if there isn't team success. Okay? So that is the case. So that is, and so the grading rubric is on page 9, is used each time, and so you will have a total of 120 points there. And then you do a reflection paper after each hearing where you reflect on what you did, what went well, what didn't go well, and lessons learned. Okay? Now I'm going to start. You're going to hear this over and over again. What I am not looking for, what is not successful on the reflection paper, is a description of what happened. Okay, I was there, I saw it. You were there, you saw it, right? That's not very. You don't really learn much from that. Okay, so it's not a description of what happened. What it is reflection on what did you do that went well? Why did it go well? Why did you do that? What would you do differently? What didn't go so well? What would you do differently next time? How did you use the things that you're learning in the course in the simulation? That sort of thing. And so there is a grading rubric for the reflection papers on page 11, and shows you how you're going to be evaluated. Okay, so and there you get an individual grade. Each person gets their own individual grade on that, so that's for a total of 60 points. So it's basically 2/3, 1/3, right? The history experience in this class says the number one barrier to doing really well in the course is turning in your reflection paper late. Okay, there are penalties for that, and so just don't do it. Get it in on time. Set various reminders. Okay, they're always going to be due soon after the actual hearing. The dates are all in the syllabus and so forth. So they're due Monday at 5 p.m. after we have the hearing on Wednesday, evening. Okay, so it gives you plenty of time to write a reflection paper. There, I mean, it says here how long they're supposed to be, but I think it's 4 to 6 pages. If I'm remembering right off the top of my head. So switch it here. At least 4, but no more than 6 pages. Okay. Generally, if you have a cover page and then 2.5 pages, and you're calling that 4, you haven't reflected enough, right? I mean, you have to be either unusually succinct in your writing and pack a lot of brilliant insight into 2.5 pages, or more likely you're not writing enough. If, on the other hand, you want to go on for 10 pages, right? Stop. Get a life. Do something else other than write the reflection paper. That's too much, right? Okay. So that's the gist of this. So. But again, I would encourage you to put all of these dates into calendars, set alarms, maybe set multiple alarms. Don't turn it in late, because the penalties for turning it in late have a pretty significant effect on the points. I'll also kind of cut to the heart of the matter in terms of how this works, because teamwork makes students anxious. And then okay, how many of you have had bad experiences working in teams? Okay, everybody put up your hand, because if you haven't, you're just lying, or you're being shy or something, right? Because of course everybody's had bad experiences with teams. Okay, and this is not it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a breeze, but in general, my experience with this course is that the first hearings, not all teams are doing extraordinary work. This is a new class, you're learning how to apply this, it's a new experience, and so forth. And so, if you are, it is not unusual for the first hearing to involve some B level grades. But in general, over the years, almost everybody earns an A or A- in the course. That's just sort of been my experience, because you figure out what works, what doesn't work, and actually, honestly, some teams, so I think it was last time I taught, which was 2 years ago, or the time before that, but I had a team that was A+ every time. They hit it on all cylinders every time, and so it's totally possible. But presumably you're in this class to learn, and if you could all do this already, you'd be, have the degrees and be teaching the class and so forth. But anyway, but the point is that you should not have a lot of anxiety about it, but you should pay attention to lessons that we're going to talk about over time, especially next week, about how to, what are some of the successful methods for organizing and effectuating teamwork. So we will do some of that. Now, there's going to be other skills, right? So it's going to be advocacy skills, framing skills, use of law and legal principles, use of planning and planning principles, use of factual evidence. Okay, so that's one thing that sometimes people get kind of hung up on. They get an awful lot of broad arguments and no facts. Okay, so that's all of that are going to be things that we're going to work on. And then you have another one that has to do with use of process. And then you will hear quite a lot from me about standards, application of legal standards and planning standards to facts, to create findings that support decisions. Okay? And whether you are advocating and you are saying these are what the findings should be, or whether you are making a decision and saying these are what the findings are, that's going to be a key component of this class. And again, folks who just completed environmental law know that ends up being a key part of how courts review what administrative agencies do. Actually, we've had a couple recent cases come out from the courts just in the last week or so that emphasize this very point, that the courts are looking for, do the decision makers apply the appropriate standards, carefully consider the evidence, reach articulated, well-reasoned findings that support their decision. And that's really, if I had to boil administrative law down to a short nutshell, that's it. And so we're going to spend time doing that, figuring out how you actually do that in the real world. Okay? So that's how the course is structured. I'm going to talk in just a moment here about I'm going to call your attention to the dates, and then I'm going to talk about the subject matters that we're going to cover. But any questions so far about the structure of the course? Okay. All right, so dates, top of page 13, I have just went ahead and put them right there for you, important hearing or paper due dates. And so we have the West End Walmart simulation is going to be February 12th, and then your reflection paper is due by 5 p.m. on February 17th. Then right after spring break, the Stapleton Ridge hearing subdivision, and it just is what it is depending on when they put spring break on the calendar this year. So last year we got this in before spring break, but spring break occurs a little earlier this year. So we're going to have Stapleton Ridge right after spring break on the 18th, and then the 23rd by 5 p.m. is your reflection paper. And then it's not that much later, on April 15th, we have the U.S. Farmers Biofuel Plant hearing simulation, and then your reflection paper due on the 20th. You need to plan to be here on the days of the hearings, okay? And there are, it's actually less and less likely, but we have had over the years 2 or 3 hearings that have gone over the normal 3 hours of class, just because that's how it played out with the hearing. In recent years, the students have been better time managers of the hearing process, so that has not happened in recent years. But I just be aware that if you have some sort of personal or family commitment that you have to be out of here right when class ends, and so forth, that you should plan on doing something in the hearing that occurs earlier. Just be aware that they can run a little bit later. Just again, like the real world. Okay, so I have been, at midnight, 1 in the morning, at a planning commission hearing, and that's not what anybody had hoped or intended, but sometimes that's just what happens. So, you have to adapt. So, just be aware. In terms of the subject matters we're going to cover, there are they're covered in the assignment starting on page 15. Today we're going to talk about the structure of the land use regulatory system in the United States, and just sort of basically introductory stuff. Then next week we're talking about planning and both what is planning, so planning concepts, planning theories, and also legal sort of perspectives on planning, what's required, what's prohibited, that sort of thing. We're going to talk about good and bad planning, and then we're also going to talk about good and bad teamwork. Okay, so that's next week. Then we turn to zoning, zoning amendments, flexible zoning techniques, and some of these sort of things about skills in using facts, reasoning, and findings. And so that's the 22nd. You will see in the assignments there are reading assignments in this book in particular. I would encourage you to read it for read the assigned readings for what you can get out of it. If you are not a law student, some of this may be pretty challenging. If I were you, I would not spend endless hours sort of trying to totally master the cases, because again, we're going to talk about them in class. You're going to get quite a bit about them from the lectures. So the idea is to get some introductory perspective on what these cases look like, what they, what goes on in them, what judges do in these cases, how the cases arise, those kinds of things. But don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to master this before class. Most of the law students know there's not going to be any cold calling, there's not going to be any Socratic questioning, there's no what's the holding in this case, because we actually are have a lot to cover, and B, what we're really going to do is apply all this as lawyers actually do, and planners and so forth, with the hearing projects and that kind of thing. So we're going to spend a lot more time doing application than we are trying to discern what some Supreme Court justice meant in some cases. So then on January 29th, we're going to talk about permits, conditional use permits, variances, subdivision maps, hearings, procedural and substantive due process, and continue on with the use of facts, reasoning, and problem solving, including their use in advocacy. February 5th is growth controls, vested rights, non-conforming uses, conservation, and land use. And we talk a little bit about how in these conflicts you might actually engage in some creative problem solving and come up with solutions that don't fit neatly in all the boxes. So then the 12th is the first hearing simulation. For the next couple classes, we will not break into groups yet, but pretty soon, during some portion of the class period, you're going to be meeting in your groups and so forth, and I'm going to come around and talk with you about what you're doing for the hearing. So that will be how a portion of the class time occurs. Then after that, we turn to takings and private property rights and eminent domain and those sorts of things. So that will take us through 2 class sessions, and then we're going to have a period class session where we basically kind of catch up and we can talk about some broader legal issues, but also really use that time to be prepared for the Stapleton Ridge subdivision hearing, which will be after spring break. Then on March 25th, we will talk about a variety of issues related to discrimination in land use, everything from equal protection, race, civil rights, those kinds of things, to religion, free exercise of religion, establishment of religion, free speech, which interestingly enough, there are signs. So signage ends up being a big free speech issue in land use, and so do adult establishments. So we end up reading cases that involve churches and then nude dancing. So it's a very interesting, not together, okay? Those are not the same land use, but it's a very interesting sort of, can cover a range of things. We talk about exclusionary and inclusionary zoning, some of those kinds of things. Then on April 1st, we will not gather in this room as a class. Instead, we will be upstairs for the Vail Distinguished Lecture in Land Use Policy, which will be given by Professor Shelley Saxer of Pepperdine University. And then on April 8th, we will have a class session on environmental justice in land use, which will be highly relevant to that last hearing, but it's also an area where I've written a fair amount. One of the things that I just want to give you a heads up is I will assign the book I wrote on that, so it's a big chunk of reading all at once, but it's again there's a lot of graphics in it, a lot of charts and tables and pictures and maps and so on and so forth, and it also there are a lot of bullet points of principles or examples. We'll pull out examples, so it is not like 145 pages of reading cases and so forth, but it also will be something that you might want to get a head start on when we start getting into this area. Just go ahead and latch onto it and start reading it when you can, because it'll provide a variety of useful tools and principles to you. And so then we'll end with the U.S. Farmers Biofuel Plant Simulation on the 15th. And then by 5 p.m. on the 20th, you are done with this class when you turn in your last reflection paper. Questions about any of that? All right. So, and we will take some breaks periodically. Before we take our first break, I just want to start by asking you, what are some of the most significant land use issues that you see or that you're aware of? What do you think is important? What interests you? What do you think our society or our institutions need to be concerned about?
Real estate development.
Okay. What about real estate development?
Well, how and where and when it's allowed for both commercial and residential.
So, do you think there's not enough of it, too much of it, the right kind, not the right kind? I'm trying to. So what do you think are kind of the?
Well, I don't feel any type of way about whether there's enough or not enough, but it has to be controlled when it does happen, and we know that it does happen. We're all in a building right now, and we're all going to go to buildings tonight and sleep in them hopefully. And so why are we allowed to have this university here, but then the restaurant that I eat dinner at on Bardstown Road and the house I live in a few blocks away?
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Good. So, by the way, let's just we can kind of throw this out. A little tidbits here and there. Any thoughts about why the University of Louisville can be here?
Brownfields, brownfield redevelopment.
Okay. So what do you mean by brownfields?
It is a contaminated site because waste onto a nitrogen growth.
And so we're sitting on contamination right now.
Well, you can cap it or mitigate it in certain ways. And I thought we capped ours and built on top of it.
Okay, what did we build on? What's
Oh, never mind. I know Cardinal Stadium.
Yes,
but
yeah, Cardinal Stadium, the famous brownfields redevelopment site. Okay, so if we were to say, why is Cardinal Stadium there? The answer would be, in part, at least partly, it was a contaminated site, and one possible solution was to cap it and then build a stadium on top of it. Okay, right? So it's not a hospital, it's not a child care center, it's not people's homes, right? So yeah, so that's there. But what about that doesn't sort of deal with the rest of the university. So anybody have any idea in terms of control or non-control of land development? Why do you have?
Well, I know the Belknap family originally bought the land that Belknap is on now, and once you put U there, the city didn't allow them to.
Okay.
So this was backup site.
All right. So one thing is that prohibited land uses in one place may lead to those uses occurring somewhere else. Right? Okay. So think about whether it's a balloon or I think of a waterbed. Right? You sit down on one end and it goes up and right or whatever. Right? And, but however you want to do it, anything where there's a displacement. Right? If you prohibit something somewhere and there's enough of a demand for it, it's going to occur somewhere else. Okay. So that's also just basic reality of sort of the dynamics of land development and especially the economics of it. Okay. But what about U of L itself? Okay. So let's assume for a moment that this new academic building that is over that they built over here on the far side of campus. It used to be where the old basketball arena was, which then became some sort of like gym for a while and so forth. But, right? You know what I'm talking about? New academic building. Okay. So as far as I know, I could be wrong. As far as I know, no zoning or land use permits were required for that. They probably needed some sort of occupancy permit, but no land use or zoning permits. Why?
Because of the university's affiliation as part of the state government.
Exactly. The university is a unit within the state government. Okay. So therefore, it basically is not bound by local zoning. Right. Okay? So, I mean, think about putting in post offices. Okay? U.S. Postal Service buys land; they can put it in wherever they want because they can preempt the local land use regulation. Right? Okay? So U of L is an example of a governmental entity that is not necessarily bound by local land use regulations. Okay? So one of the challenges, one of the issues that can come up in a lot of communities has to do with school districts. Okay? So school districts are local, but they are not controlled by the city government. Right? They have their own independent status in most states. Right? Is everybody following me? And so when the local school system wants to put a school district somewhere, in many states, I'm not saying this is true everywhere, but in many states, they can just do it. They don't have to get planning or zoning approval, right? Because they are a co-equal unit of government established under state law. And you could imagine that the planning and zoning unit of the city government could basically stop any new schools from being built, right? If they could exercise that power. So that's just an interesting little tidbit that gets us thinking about there are different kinds of users of land, different kinds of legal authorities. We have different levels of government, federal, state, local. Even at the local level, there are different sources of legal authority and jurisdiction for those. And so that can shape how real estate development or land development occurs. Okay? What other kinds of issues do you think are important? Parking is an issue. What about parking?
It uses a very large amount of land.
Uh-huh.
There are requirements for developments to have a certain amount of parking, which are being called one question.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, and parking is it encourages or incentivizes what kind of development patterns? Sprawl, automobile dependent. Okay, so actually, so sprawl perhaps, but even if it doesn't have to produce sprawl, but what it does is it produces automobile dependent development, right? Okay, what else?
We'll fight over mixed use versus single use zoning.
Okay, mixed use versus single use. All right, so we're going to spend some time talking about this, but much of zoning, but perhaps not as much as you might think, but certainly a fair amount of zoning is single-use zoning. So, a particular parcel of land is designated for residential or commercial, maybe a particular type of commercial. It might be designated industrial, might be designated agricultural open space, but in general, the allowed use is in a particular category of uses, and that tends to produces a couple things. One is it produces segregation of uses, but it also tends to encourage sprawl because you have all these sort of residential areas out that are separate and distinct from where the commercial development is. And so there has been observation that historically, many of our cities and towns and villages in their early years had mixed-use land development. This was primarily preceded zoning, right? So this is how development patterns appeared before zoning. So you would have various sort of commercial enterprises, shops, and so on and so forth, retail centers, restaurants, taverns, bars, and so forth. And then you would have people living above them, and it was more compact, and people could walk around and so forth. And so mixed-use zoning has often been suggested as, hey, this is instead of segregating all these uses, this is actually a better development pattern. It produces more sustainability, less use of land, more walkability, and so forth. And say, who doesn't want to live in a condo over your favorite bar, for example, or whatever, right? Or your favorite bakery, or dangerous, right? So, but anyway, that sort of idea. Now, having said that, okay, so we want to be careful about historical romanticism, right? So also, you had residential development in amongst industrial land uses, tanneries, et cetera, where there were a lot of bad things, toxic chemicals, waste, et cetera, right? I mean, so that was so compact meant compact all the way around. So, for example, if you lived in a town or village, you lived here in Louisville downtown in the early to mid 1800s, right? You may have been a lot more compact, but your sewage was also flowing down a culvert in the street into the Ohio River, and you might have had next door somebody using a lot of bad chemicals in the tannery, right? And so that was so we just want to. And one of the things you're going to find in this course is I'm going to push a lot on assumptions. Okay, there's a lot of assumptions that get sort of tossed around in the land use area, and I'm going to push on them a fair amount, sort of say, well, is that always the way it is? And what are, and the idea here is not to say mixed use is bad, but to get you to be more precise, right? So rather than sort of toss out mixed use generally, I'm not saying you're going to be this, for this class discussion is actually very precise, but just to as you sort of think about these issues, you'll think about, okay, what kind of mixed use are we talking about? Under what circumstances? Is mixed use always the best thing? Because we kind of got down this road where we thought single use was the right thing, and it was perhaps overused. And so, could we think about mixed use, but let's not get carried away with that. I do not think we want to go back to people living in industrial facilities, right, having the factory and their housing all together on the same site, right? I don't think, maybe somebody wants to do that, but I don't think so. I think that's where we want to go. So we kind of think about that. What else? What other issues?
The effect of development on the environment, specifically green blue infrastructure.
Okay. Effective development on environment and green and blue infrastructure, things like trees and wetlands and urban forest and parks and so on and so forth. So with green and blue infrastructure, well-functioning watersheds and streams and so forth. So what's the critical problem?
Especially developing new real estate or previously undeveloped real estate, you're going to be taking away a lot of trees and plants and stuff that aren't going to be replaced generally, or it could add to the runoff situation, polluted waters. And
okay. Yeah. So a lot of different kinds of impacts that development has, and so how are we going to manage that? How are we going to control that? And so forth. And again, raises those issues. I mean, is it too much development? Is it not the right kind of development? Is it not controlled the right way? That kind of thing. Yeah.
It's kind of jumping off of Kirk's point. I was going to say gentrification.
Gentrification. Yeah. Okay. Gentrification. So there are. Who doesn't want to live in a neighborhood that has improving conditions or has good conditions, right? I mean, who wants to live in some place where the property's all vacant and abandoned and falling down, and there's a lot of sort of unhealthy, unsafe conditions. Okay. On the other hand, if you are low income and you live in an area that has historically been deteriorated or poor conditions, and you start improving them, right? Then all of a sudden, you're being evicted. Rents are going up. Housing prices are going up. And now, are you getting to benefit from those improved conditions? Are you getting to go to the cool, nifty coffee shop that's down the street that's charging, $6.50 for a latte? Or are you now moving to some other rundown neighborhood because that's all you can afford? Okay, so gentrification is a serious issue. Now, having said that, again, pushing on language, and I know because actually Olivia's a plan, so because we talked about this in environmental law. But one of the things I want to suggest to you that the problem is actually this combination of gentrification and displacement. Gentrification and displacement. So for a long time, the concern has been primarily with gentrification, and it led to too much reluctance to improve neighborhoods. And it led to too many assumptions that every improvement of a neighborhood was going to displace the marginalized people who live there. And it turns out that's empirically, that is not true. Okay? So you can have neighborhood improvements where, not to say that nobody's ever displaced, but people come and go from neighborhoods all the time. But you don't have this sort of systematic displacement of the poorest people in those neighborhoods. Okay? So it can happen. We have plenty of good examples where it can happen. And we are only starting to figure out what factors affect that or not. Right? This has been a puzzle for social scientists for quite a while. Okay? When do you get displacement? When do you not? And so we're trying to figure it out. And we've got improving knowledge and study, but the reason that we have improving knowledge and study is people quit treating gentrification as this big broad term of something bad, and instead started saying, okay, actually there's sort of multiple things going on here. So again, get to the facts and push a little bit on your assumptions, push a little bit on the meaning of your words. What are you talking about here? And so you're going to get that a lot in this class, and you'll probably be tired of it by the end of the semester, but it will help you think more critically, more precisely about the issues. Okay, so I'm going to raise a couple. So just to pick something that is currently in the news, I'm not going to pick Iran. Okay, so just so you know, we're not going there. Okay, so Australia. Okay, right? Australia. I mean, it's on fire, right? I mean, has everybody following this, seeing this, right? I mean, and so the enormous destruction of the environment, the enormous cost to to human health and safety and life, the enormous loss of animals and biological life, biodiversity, just the economic cost, right? Okay, so why is this a land use issue?
Fires happening on land.
Okay, well, yeah, right, but that's, I mean, lots of things happen on land. What about this makes more relevant to this class?
Well, the question of where and when do you rebuild and when do you relocate?
Okay, so there's going to be long-term issues planning for what happens after all the fires stop and so forth.
Farming, ranching, and living places that might be technically feasible, but long-term bad idea.
Okay, so one of the things is, do we have unsustainable land use and land development patterns? Are we creating the likelihood that things are going to happen, or that even if that's not going to cause the fire, if now what we're saying is we're going to have the nature is going to be less able to create fire breaks and so forth because we have too much development in these areas, or this fire's going to spread more. So one of the big issues in the American West is because of land development, you now have a lot of undergrowth that is never cleared out, right? That ends up being just fueling these fires, and so they become more intense. They spread more quickly because who wants to start a controlled burn right next to fancy schmancy mansions, right? I mean, nobody wants to do that, but because we built there and then we don't clear out the underbrush, it is creating a problem. And then the actual risks, the human risks, the risk to the developed community, because we're all there, we're right there in the midst of it. So yeah,
So, well, I think generally now that Australia is on fire, it changes the relationship that humans living there have with the land and the animals that were living with the land. So if everything's different, that means it's going to be really tough to have certainty to have your ecosystem be where it was.
Yep.
So that I would think is probably a more specific land issue because they don't even know what used to denote.
Right, exactly, right. And so I mean, the radical changes, and so what's the future of that land system going to look like? Okay, another one is how do we even get to this place to begin with, right? So one of the things that we see a lot is the word unprecedented. Everything's unprecedented. Unprecedented floods, unprecedented hurricanes, unprecedented wildfires, that kind of thing. I haven't seen any sort of scientific studies that tell me one way or the other about whether this particular set of fires in Australia, how much climate change is a contributing factor to that or not. But we do see increase in temperatures globally. Okay, so we do know that's true. We know that that creates the conditions that make for more intense, whether it's fires or floods or that kind of thing, and so forth. And so we're seeing that in a lot of places. And so the thing is, though, if we step one step back from that, okay, why are these temperature patterns being so extreme and so unusual, so unprecedented? Well, are again sprawling, energy-using, carbon-emitting, car dependent, transportation dependent land development patterns are contributing. Right? I think that's pretty clear. Now we got to be careful. We don't get carried away and say it's all land development or it's all sprawl. And actually, there's a fair number of things that also come with our land development patterns, especially as they've emerged, that are actually mitigating climate change. Right? So again, I want to be careful here. So everybody sort of see, okay, you can't be make sort of big, broad, sweeping assumptions that are not actually supported by the nuances of the facts themselves. But what I want to suggest is that land development patterns here in the United States and wildfires in Australia are not totally disconnected. Okay, right? I mean, or land development patterns in the United States and all sorts of things. Okay, so one of the things that a number of years ago, I was on a climate change task force for Louisville Metro, and we developed a climate action plan for Louisville Metro, which had really widespread buy-in, everything from industry and development community to academia to environmentalists and to also planners, all sorts of folks. We're really bought into this, we did it, and we presented it to the then mayor, and he said, thank you, but we're not going to do anything about it because it's too expensive to do anything about it. So it sits on a shelf somewhere. But one of the things that we did in that report, which is interestingly enough, showed up in a series of news articles about sometime within the last year or so, is we identified Louisville as a potential destination for climate refugees. Okay? So you have people in Florida who now find their property regularly underwater. If they're not now, but if it's at some point in time. So you have people in Florida, sea level rise, storm surge, okay, right? You have parts of the American Southwest where it is now simply too hot to live. And I'm not saying now, but think of yourself at that point in the future, some point in the future, where we sort of see this trend, okay, where it's just simply too hot to live. Okay? Older people who no longer find Arizona healthy, if not quite unhealthy, because it's too hot, it's too dry. Communities that do not have enough water. I mean, Las Vegas is headed for a disaster in terms of water. And I'm going to talk about Las Vegas later. But anyway, so you think about these things. Okay, where do people move? Louisville is a pretty decently large city for being a very livable city, right? Our cost of living is not all that high. We've got plenty of water here. Our temperatures, our weather is relatively moderate as it goes, right? We're not Minnesota, and we're not El Paso, right? I mean, right? So yes, we have some hot times, we have some cold times, and so forth. But yes, as things go, it's pretty green here. It's actually pretty, right? There are plenty of services and so forth. But is Louisville, in terms of land use and land development, is Louisville ready, prepared for an influx of climate refugees? I mean, I would suggest not. I do not think that anybody is really doing anything that would prepare Louisville for that, with a couple of exceptions. I actually do think that some of the utility companies have started thinking about this. I think MSD is thinking about it. I think LG&E is thinking about it. I think the Louisville Water Company is thinking about it. They're thinking long term. They're thinking about capacity, and they recognize this is a very real possibility. Now, the rest of us, we are totally unprepared for the amount of traffic that's going to be involved, the increase in the cost of housing. Right? Do you see the kinds of things that? Okay, so these are all issues. How is the legal system set up for dealing with that kind of unexpected change to local land development patterns? Have planners thought about this? What's in place? Is the land use planning and regulatory system set up with tools to deal with this or not? These are some of the kinds of issues to think about. So, I know I seem a little bit flippant when I say Australia. Let's talk about Australia. But what I'm trying to suggest here is there are some really pretty significant big picture issues that are happening in our community, in our world, that really challenge the land use regulatory system. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about, okay, well, how's it structured? What is it set up to deal with some of these kinds of issues, and how? But we're going to talk about that after a break. So we will come back at 7 and pick up there. All right, so one of the things that we want to do from the outset is going to kind of take the bird's eye view, get up in the air, and take a look down on the land use planning and regulatory system in the United States. So think about what we're doing here as really a organized system, and think of it as what we call a complex adaptive system. Okay, so complex does not necessarily mean complicated. What complex means is that the pieces are interconnected, interdependent. So you can't just look at one thing without considering everything else and how they all affect each other. And adaptive means that the system is not rigid, it is not static, it's not going to just remain the same, it's actually dynamic, it's actually changing and adapting as conditions demand. So there are lots and lots of complex adaptive systems in the world. So this sort of systems analysis is not anything that is unusual. But at the time that I wrote this article, which is mentioned in the syllabus, the structure of the land use regulatory system in the United States, nobody had really taken this form of analysis to land use in the United States. And it's gone through this systematic approach. And so that's where this comes from, this little sort of mini lecture. And it helps us to sort of think big picture about what's really going on here. So first of all, and so the starting point of the article, the starting point of the entire question about why should we even look at land use as a system is that land use law and planning and regulation in the United States is sort of a punching bag. It gets criticized a lot. Okay? And so on one hand, you have people who say that it's a very inefficient system, that we end up with the government making decisions that are better left to the market, or government being influenced too much by major market players. You've got kind of two ends of the spectrum, people who are a little bit more private market dynamics or who are a little bit more libertarian. And you get folks who are a little bit more critical of government being captured by special economic interests. And the idea here is that the government's making inefficient decisions, economically poor decisions about land use. Another kind of criticism that goes on is that the system is largely an inequitable, unfair, unjust system where certain interests are favored and others aren't. Is a tool for a lot of discrimination and harming one group to benefit another, and so forth. And so it's largely an inequitable system. And then there's a lot of criticism that it's a largely environmentally harmful system. And these are sort of the essence of many of the comments that you raised recently, just before we took our break, that there are a lot of ways that we use land use that cause harm to various aspects of the human and natural environment, and so the system's not working very well that way. And so all of these criticisms come with ideas about how the system could be totally different. It could be pure market dynamics. It could be, you could have lots of sort of guardians of the public that take over and protect the public against sort of private development that's gone bad. So that's sort of the two ends of the efficiency spectrum. You could have systems where that empower the least empowered, that you embed in the system certain principles of equity that have to be applied, and so forth. And you should have a land use system that is primarily really a system of environmental regulation and environmental conservation. So forget all about sort of economic development goals, forget about a lot of other things, and make it more about environmental protection. So these are sort of the arguments that are out there. And my point is that, well, they're all interesting. And certainly it's useful to critique land use and what we're doing, but we have to understand what it does as a system. We have to think about it as an actual functional system. It exists for some purpose, right? And I don't think a bunch of people got together and said, hey, let's create the most inefficient, inequitable, and environmentally harmful system possible and perpetuate it. I don't think that's, maybe, but I don't think that's really what we did. I think that this system, it has flaws, it has impacts, but it exists for a purpose. And the question is, if we're going to critique it well, we need to understand, or we're going to reform it or change it or whatever, we first have to understand what we're doing here. So first of all, what I want to suggest is that the land use planning and regulatory system in the United States is not meant to achieve a particular set of outcomes. It doesn't have a set of outcomes in mind. It does achieve some outcomes as a matter of how it operates, but it doesn't. That's not its purpose. Its function is a mediating system. Okay, it mediates between people and places. It is a way that we make decisions about how we and the places where we live, work, and play are going to interact, how they're going to be structured, how our lives as people, as communities, and so forth, and our environment in which we do the things in life are going to be structured. Where we're going to live, how we're going to where we're going to work, how that's going to be structured. And it kind of goes back to Connor's point initially. Sort of why do we have this or that or something else? We've made these choices. Why we have U of L here? Why there's a restaurant on Bardstown Road? Right? We've made choices about those kinds of things. Right? And so and think about it. Right? Think about Bardstown Road is by and large a different kind of place than Middletown Road or than Shelbyville Road out in Middletown. Right? Right? Yes. Yeah. Really different. Right? Okay. So and so West Louisville is a different kind of place than St. Matthews. Right? I mean, so we've made choices, and then you start going bigger, and you start again going to the Gulf communities in Arizona and little villages in Maine, and so on and so forth. And you start thinking about all the kinds of places and the people who inhabit those places. And we have used a variety of tools in our land use planning, regulation, and law to make those places the way they are. We've also used land use planning, regulation, and law as a way to mediate between communities of people and power. How power gets exercised, who has power, and so forth. Okay, so. Think about for a moment about neighbors in a neighborhood, right? And so there's a certain vision of the place, but the question is, how much say do those neighbors have, those residents of that neighborhood have, over whether there's going to be a new apartment complex, half a mile down the road, or whether a group home is going to be approved in their neighborhood, right? I mean, those are significant issues, right? Significant questions, right? Okay, and I mean, it's easy to sort of think about this very simply as sort of suburban NIMBYist, okay? But I mean, just take a look. Over here by Cherokee Park, when they put in this, what was the name of the development, the huge tall tower? I'm sorry? One park. Yeah. And so, I mean, right? So it's not just it's not just the people out by Oxmoor Mall who don't want Topgolf, right? Right? Just to sort of keep pulling from local examples, but it's also the folks over there at Cherokee Park and so forth, right? And so there are significant ways in which how we do land use planning and regulation shapes the relationships between communities and power, political and social power, and to some degree economic power. So, for example, another thing that would be, I think, very interesting to point out is, and we're gonna get into this later, but y'all probably, or many of you probably heard about the Louisville redlining project. Okay, so how the government and major financial institutions intentionally steered investments and home loans away from black neighborhoods and to white neighborhoods, and put the money in white neighborhoods, right? So we have this history that this happened. Okay, and so and I'm gonna try to be again we're going to try to push on all sorts of things. So when we see, for example, environmentalism, there's some, what I think of as some positive things that came out of the New Deal. But the New Deal era was exactly when redlining was going on.